Welcome as well, everyone. So glad that you could be with us tonight. I see a lot of faces of members of the Bayt. I see a lot of faces who are members of our community at large, and we're delighted that you could be with us tonight. I think I would be speaking for just about every person in this room when I express the tremendous pride that we all have whenever we see Melissa on TV or social media. Really sucking it to the opposition. It's such a good feeling whenever I hear Melissa speak her mind. Deputy leader of His Majesty's Loyal Opposition, and we have a tradition in Judaism that we're only allowed to say a portion of one's praise in the presence of the person present. So I'm not going to express everything that we could say about Melissa, but it really does raise the prestige of our community when we know that you are a leader within the Canadian government. And it is also very reassuring that as a Jew, your voice extends so far and wide throughout Canadian society. We consider you a great defender of the Jewish people, and we just want to say thank you. So, and Melissa has asked me to call her Melissa. I don't mean any irreverence by it. We're going to have a bit of a conversation, and then we also have the ability for people to take a scrap of paper that's on the table over here, write out your question, and then there's a lady, a very fine lady with an orange sweater, whose name is Avital. And you can give your slip of paper to Avital, and once she accumulates a bunch, she'll pass them up to us so that we can go through some questions at the end of the session. So Melissa, it's been a really interesting several months since October 7th, and I'm sure that there's nothing that could have prepared you, or prepared any of us, for what's happening. But specifically for a parliamentarian who is representing not only the riding, but the Jewish community of Canada. Tell us how it's been for you over the last several months.
Well, first, if you'll allow me just to say thank you for hosting this conversation. Thank you always to Bayt for a welcoming environment, the support that comes from this community. It makes it easier. I have to tell you, when you see me on the internet, I have to explain to people that I'm much nicer in person. I also have to tell them that whenever I'm not feeling great, I just go walk around Thornhill, and it's amazing the response that I get here because you guys are all a part of this, and we are lucky to be represented here by a number of good coalitions. One who's sitting right here, Laura Smith, who has not been any less. So we're lucky, and I also know that I'm just warming the seat for whoever comes next in Thornhill. It's a rental for me, and I'm going to do the best job that I can while you have faith in me to do that job, and then we're going to make sure to leave it in good stead and hand it over to the next person that will be, an equally powerful or a better voice for this community, because there are less and less voices. So,
well, when you're ready to vacate to become the next prime minister, we'll find
To answer your question on October 7th, that day. Okay, so if you remember that night, it was a little bit cold, and it was still Sukkot. So some of you wouldn't have known that until the next morning, but I was at a friend's sukkah, and we had just been in Israel not too long ago, and still had the alerts on. So the phone went off, and it was still hot. And the phone went off for a couple people in the sukkah, so I decided to go to the bathroom to see why my phone was beeping. And then you saw what was happening, and that night, we knew right away that this was going to be different. And this was going to be different for the state of Israel, but more importantly, this was going to be different for the diaspora community. And if we think that we are operating in an environment that was the same as October 7th. Like, I don't want to be the one to give you the bad news, but we are not. This is going to be a very different world for Jews in Israel and Jews outside of Israel. And that realization, hit me before I actually didn't go to bed that night, because, and you'll like this very much, because I was on a chat with Pierre in the office. We put together a quick chat saying, something's going on here, and you gotta be ready to take the mantle, because we know that this government won't. And so he was engaged, like it was 3 in the morning and still talking about this, because things seemed different that night. And I've since had the opportunity to go. I know that many in this room have had the opportunity to go, some just in the last week, and it is not the same there, and it is certainly not the same living in a community in Thornhill, outside of Thornhill, anywhere in Canada, or on vile devices that we carry in our pockets on every social media site. And if you don't want to believe me, look at any of my posts and see what is going on. And those are already somewhat censored, because we just take off swear words. We don't allow people to post swear words. We allow people to post whatever they want, but we thought that, there's a lot of kids that read my social media, and we thought that the swearing would take out some of the comments, but they are absolutely shocking.
So share with us, Melissa, what are you seeing on Parliament Hill as far as your fellow politicians? How are they reacting? Are you sensing any anti-Semitism, certainly anti-Israelism?
Well, look, I think there are some who have been beacons of light in a time of darkness in Parliament, but that is not the majority. It is not even close to the majority. It's not even a little small proportion of what needs to be said. I'm going to say something, and it is going to be deeply partisan, but I've never seen a government turn its back so hard on a long-standing position that this country has had. It started on the night that the hospital was so-called bombed in Gaza, and it continued every step of the way, from votes that were changed at the UN, to posting UN reports with a known anti-Semite, to being offside with our biggest allies, the US, the US, Germany, the UK. I never thought that the two parties who vied to be the government in this country would be so far apart on a single issue. So I am very vocal in the House. If you were sitting in the gallery, you will often hear me screaming like Hamas caucus. Like, I am not shy about it. There are people in the House of Commons that are vying today to restore funding to UNRWA, which we just cut. And they do it in public, and they do it vocally. And there are, under the guise of being anti-Israel, it does feel anti-Jewish, because it is anti-Jewish. There is no difference when these people speak. And that's the unfortunate reality that I think that we have to face as a community in Canada. There are a number of seats where the Jewish community is a large proportion of the vote, and there is an even bigger number where we are not. And in order to have that voice, we've got to convince a lot of our friends who are in places where there isn't a large Jewish community to support us, and that is difficult.
Well, to that point, Canada is very different from the United States in that respect. There still seems to be at least a Jewish majority over the Muslim population in the US, but in Canada, there's got to be like 6 or 7 times as many Muslims as Jews. And that's quite alarming. And as a matter of fact, someone that I used to dialogue with, who's a Muslim, and we used to talk about Muslim-Jewish relations, he said to me quite openly, at the moment, he said, "Rabbi, you guys are screwed." Those were his exact words. Because this kowtowing of many of the politicians on the other side of the aisle is due to the fact that they know that's where the future of Canada lies, that's where the votes are.
You're absolutely right. That's never been, I'm not going to tell the rabbi to explain, to tell people to have more kids, but we lost that fight. But
I did my share.
Yeah. But the reality is that if we fall into the trap of making this a Jewish Muslim, a Christian Muslim, a religious fight, we will trap ourselves into being perennial losers. This is a fight that is civilization versus barbarism. It is a fight of ideology. It is the Cold War fight all over again of freedom-loving democracies and what is right in the world versus a barbarism that we don't understand. Or quite frankly, now we do as Jews after October 7th. It is the Chinas and the Russias and the Irans of the world that are funding, organizing, recruiting everywhere in the world against freedom. If we can tell that story, if we can get people on side to protect the Western democracies and the freedom of democracy, the rule of law, and everything that we have come to embrace, everything that my parents left in the Soviet Union, including the red lines, that is going to be how we win the future. It isn't going to be a fight against religion, because if you start getting into a fight of religion, guess what? It doesn't stop at the Jews. It starts at the Jews and it never ends at the Jews. And we've seen burned down churches, we've seen temples, Hindu temples desecrated, gurdwaras, with gunshots on them. The world that we want to live in is not one that is free of religion. It is one that embraces religion as a fundamental values of communities that would be like-minded for us.
And I completely hear what you're saying, and in principle I agree. And yet I'm still quite concerned, and I think some of us are, about the indoctrination of anti-Semitism that's taking place in the mosques and the madrasas, just like it's taking place in Gaza. I happen to know, having listened to Muslims who have come out and expressed this, that there are whole communities here in Canada where the religious leaders are fanning the flames of this kind of dissent. And while you're right, we can't condemn religion wholesale, because that means that we're going to have to close up as well. But isn't there a difference between a faith that is westernized versus a faith that resists westernization?
Well, of course there is, and there are ways in which a country's policy, particularly public safety policy, should be able to weed some of that out. We've long called for the listing of terrorist organizations like the IRGC, who are, by the way, funding even mosques in our own neighborhood who espouse these kinds of ideas. We must fix our immigration system, and this is not a popular thing to say, but we must fix our immigration system. One, to reflect the actual, housing and availability of doctors and nurses and what we have, so your kids, don't have to live in the basement forever, even if you want them to. But on that, on that front, there is a vetting that needs to happen in this country. There is a point system that worked for so long, and it is this government that broke the consensus on almost every issue, including immigration. I know that we'll probably get to a conversation about medical assistance and dying. Everything has been broken. The consensus on everything has been broken by this government. You know what? I'm just gonna freestyle this.
Okay.
How's that?
Okay. Well, if you want to broaden that conversation a little bit, your discussion of everything being broken, let's still, before we get to other topics, let's talk about our police force and how our government is restricting our police. We've noticed over the last several weeks that the police seem to be acting with great laissez-faire, pulling back and not really doing the job that we were hoping that they would do. Is that a misperception? Are the police doing all that they should be to clamp down on some of these violent protests and calls for violence?
So some of you might have heard me say this, and some of you won't like this. I don't think we have a law problem. I think we have an enforcement problem. I don't think that people should go to Ottawa and continue to put laws on the books. In fact, I think people should go to Ottawa and take some of those laws off the books. It would be a much better use of time. We've seen in this community at the very beginning of this police forces that were very responsive, particularly north of Steeles, with the York Regional Police, thank God for them. And incidences that were resolved very, very quickly when people felt unsafe or harassed. I don't think that we've seen the same thing in Toronto, and
I'll give you a couple examples of why I think this happens. One, there are no consequences for doing anything in this country. None. None. You steal a car, you're out on bail the next day. Or later that afternoon. We call it the frequent flyer program. I'm sure there's the judges that are not here in the room, but people who are married to them, will tell you that it is a frequent flyer program in our courtrooms. It's called Bill C-75. It gives repeat offenders bail the next day. It is a weak system, and if we tighten that system, we would have less crime. The good news is that there isn't a lot of crime in Canada. The bad news is the same people committing crimes. We've got a bill called C5. I call it the Netflix and chill bill, which is completely inappropriate for a synagogue, but it allows people house arrest. It allows them to serve their sentences at home. This is a problem. That means there are no consequences. We've had 10 years of a defund the police movement. That is going to have effects on what they believe that they can do. They are always constantly under the microscope. They can do 100 things right, and they do one thing wrong, and the entire city freaks out. I don't know how you recruit people, good people, to go into policing these days. So it is a full-scale culture change that is needed, and some of that is funding, and some of that is getting rid of this nonsense DEI stuff that is infiltrated our police forces, our unions, our education system, our universities. But that is going to take some time. But to get to give up on our police, to say that they didn't act in the way that we wanted them to act, well, there is a reason for that, and I think that it's incumbent on us to change the culture of what it means to serve your country, what it means to have actual penalties and consequences for doing the wrong thing. You can steal a car 3 times in this country and nothing happens to you.
And is anything being done either by the party or by the federal
So we've
government?
been very vocal on this frequent flyer program that I talked on. We've been very vocal on reversing bail for repeat violent offenders. We've been very vocal on killing that C5 bill, which allows you to serve at home. We've been very vocal on bringing some of that funding that may be foreign aid funding back into our own military and our own institutions to start taking care of the problems that we are starting to face as Canadians. Crime was never an issue that came up in any survey in this community, ever. It was like on the list, like 7 or 8. They would talk to me about, like, I don't know, what was going on at the park with the coyotes before they would talk about crime. I'm not to say that your little dogs are very important, but crime, to hear that in Thornhill, to hear that, to see an encampment under a bridge in our own community is something. I grew up here, I've lived my entire life here. I've never seen anything like it. So this is something that I think the Canadian people want us to get serious about, and it's going to give us license to be able to speak about it. And we're gonna have to challenge the courts, which struck down some of Prime Minister Harper's justice policy. So we're gonna have to do it a bit smarter.
There's a member of our shul who is a member of the York Regional Police, an Orthodox Jew. Tell your children that Orthodox Jews can be police officers and firefighters as well. He's now in charge of recruitment for YRP, for York Regional Police. And he tells me he's having a challenge finding good candidates, probably for many of the reasons that you just mentioned. Let me ask you a question. We know that anti-Semitism exists. We know that Jew hatred exists, and sometimes it's more subtle than not. I want to also make sure that we're not overreacting to things that really aren't anti-Semitism. Can you comment on the recent Raptors game and the ejection of people who were wearing sweatshirts that said, "Free our hostages" with a mug and David on it?
Now look, if you want to be a private institution and have rules, that's fine. But we want to see the equal application of those rules. So when I see somebody be kicked out of a Raptors game for wearing a Free Your Hostages shirt, but I also see somebody at the All-Star game singing the national anthem wearing a keffiyeh, or the Raptors getting dropped off in a bus with, that says Black Lives Matter on it, well then you're picking and choosing which politics you're behind. So I don't know was it the little blue star? Was it the 142 days of hostages still being in captivity? I think we deserve an explanation, and I think that if you're going to make these rules, that they should be equally applied to every single group and every single politics. And I assure you that this is not about the MLSC or Scotiabank or the Raptors not wanting not wanting politics in the game. Politics is in the game, so if it's in the game, then you should be able to participate.
Amen. Okay. Maybe talk to us a little bit about where the government is presently as far as UNRWA. Now, the United States has permanently defunded UNRWA. There's an effort that's taking place, actually, I believe, tomorrow, to actually shut down UNRWA permanently. And yet we're hearing, like you had mentioned, that Canada has found ways to fund what's going on in Gaza outside of UNRWA. And can you just share with us, like, what's going on? Is the money still being funneled there? And
yeah, look, so the government of Canada was dragging and screaming to finally announce the defunding of UNRWA. This is, of course, after they paid in advance. Who advances $40 million? Like, there's a few people here in business. I don't think you advance $40 million before it's due. So they found ways to fund UNRWA. We had a minister of international development, or his name is Ahmed Hussein. He was just on the border of Rafah, obviously on the Egyptian side, with the gates closed, of course, because the Egyptians won't open those gates. Finding ways to talk about everything Gaza-related without any single mention of hostages or of the situation from any other point of view than the one that he was being brainwashed with at that Rafah crossing. The only sort of stop to UNRWA is to make sure that it doesn't exist any single day in the future. It needs to be killed. It needs to be too much evidence to suggest that workers at UNRWA were participants in the massacre of October 7th, that a good 10% of those 1,200 employees were somehow connected to Hamas terrorists. I suspect that number is higher. There is an effort tomorrow by Hillel Neuer, a well-known advocate. I actually recorded something with him in Geneva to permanently defund this organization. And until Canada announced permanent defunding, we certainly will defund it. We defunded it the first time under the Harper government. They reinstated it under this Liberal government, and then were forced to again defund it. So the only way to replace UNRWA is to starve it from all of the funds of the unsuspecting Western nations that thought that they were doing something right by the Palestinians. And that's not to say, and I want to make it very clear, it's not to say that there shouldn't be aid that goes to the Palestinian people. I don't think there's anybody in this room that doesn't look at the images of carnage on the other side of, and I am going to say innocent people because you know very well that a 5-year-old is innocent. And there is a lot of death and there is a lot of destruction, and it is the job of the international community to figure out how to minimize that without tying the hands of the Israelis, and with making sure that every single call calls for the disarmament of Hamas, the full surrender of Hamas, and the return of every single one of those hostages.
And cordial and polite places in the world where these kinds of things are happening. And we just have to learn how to counteract it. It's one of the things we speak about in the shul all the time, to make a Kiddush Hashem, to engage with a smile, with politeness, and with dignity, with even people that we disagree with. I know that no one in this room would ever walk into a mosque and behave that way. So let's get back to our discussion on our government for just a second. You may be aware that a few weeks ago, a group of us were invited to meet with the Prime Minister, Rev. Justin.
I was carefully going through the pictures of and trying to recognize the back of everybody's head.
Because he was wearing a kippah when he came to Bethsaida. And we were told that there was to be no media, no photographs. And then the next thing we know, there were photographs put out from his X account to show that how many Jews loved him. And unfortunately, they got a picture of me too, which I just wanted to say thank you for coming. But it seemed like he was speaking out of both sides of his mouth. And the frustration I think that so many of us are feeling is there's an outpouring of empathy and support from the mouth of our Prime Minister, but it's not translating into action. And how can we, just as regular citizens, how do we voice our dissatisfaction? Not the elections are a year and a half away, but how do we as regular citizens voice our displeasure in a way that will bring honor to the Jewish community?
So it's actually more sinister, I think, than that. It's not speaking out of both sides of his mouth. It's actually having one very clear position that has changed from a long-standing Canadian position. And I think that the reason I say it's more sinister than that is that he allows one group of MPs to go into one area of the community that probably disagrees with the majority of people in this community and say one thing, and he sends frankly, Jewish MPs or those who represent large Jewish constituencies into shuls to say an entirely different thing. And so you're getting two different messages. The problem is that this isn't 1994 anymore, and you don't have to wait till the next morning to get the Globe and Mail. Everybody's got a camera in their hand, so it's not complicated to see what the plan is. I think, I called, I'm just gonna tell a story here. I called the rabbi after that, after like composure, I got some composure, and I said to him, and this isn't anything that I wouldn't say in public. I understand why you have to do this, but I just hope that our community doesn't look to our leadership, our organizations, as those who will continue to be walked all over by a prime minister who has clearly decided to leave us high and dry. And that goes for our organizations that we all contribute to, or that we've all been part of events with. If you're going to have these things, I think that there should be a candid conversation about what Canada's longstanding position was, what you said to the community when you got elected, and what is happening right now. And if there is an admission that it has changed, well then, it is going to take a year and a half for our community to actually show up and help those candidates who are more aligned with our view. That it is that simple. In the meantime, I think that at every opportunity we are a complacent community. Things are good. Things were good for the last 70 years, where we were more concerned. And this is, again, probably not a popular thing to say. We were more concerned about joining the boards of hospitals and art galleries and less concerned with funding our own Jewish education system. We got complacent in wanting to fit in. And all of a sudden, all of the organizations that we had marched with and donated to and found common cause with left us high and dry. I'm not saying anything about the movement of systemic racism in our institutions, but the Black Lives Matter movement put out a picture of parachutes right after October 7th. If you look at the gay rights movement, who have for a long time were fighting for equality, then achieved equality, and now are fighting for something entirely different, which seems to be Hamas terrorists and the sexual violence committed against women in warfare, you cannot find common cause with them. So it's enough about fitting in, and it's time to sort of stand up and regroup, figure out who we are, what we believe in, what we want to fund, what we want to support. And so go back to the drawing board, because the world, again, is different after October 7th.
I hope I'm not sounding paranoid, but every single year for the last few years, our shul, as well as many other synagogues and places of worship in the Jewish community, receive SIP grants, which are security grants from the federal government, to help beef up our security, get security cameras, be able to pay for guards. It's a huge line item of our budget that 10 years ago did not even exist. And it's a tremendous drain on our budgetary system in our shul. This year, for some reason, I don't know of a single shul who's been approved yet for a SIP grant. And again, I don't mean to sound paranoid, but is something going on with that office that we don't know about?
So, it might look like I'm just, getting up for 30 seconds a day and yelling questions at the government, but there are other things that we do, and including this issue. Craig reached out a number of others, and we've been very helpful to the community in Montreal, which, by the way, does not vote for us, will never necessarily vote for us, but there are members of our community that, whose kids are in Montreal, whose kids attend that shul. If you grew up in Thornhill, you probably grew up to a next door neighbor who cheers for the Habs. So there's a close connection with Montreal, and they haven't received them either. So we've been calling on the minister, and we've made it very public. It's been very awkward for him to explain this, and I think that we'll have probably some more success in round 2 when we start shaking the trees on this. And the same goes for funding of organizations that have decided that somebody who served in the IDF 30 years ago is no longer welcome to speak at something that the government grants. We have to look at every single expenditure in the government, every grant, to make sure that it's going to the people that need it most, and that it's not going to the organizations that are singling out specific communities, particularly the Jewish communities. And I assure you, you can go there and you can work there for 5 years without ever taking a break, and you will still not reach the depths of all of the funding lines of government that need to be looked at.
Yeah, I mean, our difficulty, our challenge, and I think this is a challenge that they're all facing, is that we have to spend our SIP grant by March 31st, and we don't even know if we've gotten the grant yet.
I do have good news though, and Fred will like this. He's leading in the audience. Your garden grant is so we'll have vegetables. We just won't have the infrastructure to vegetables. So I think our priorities are a little bit mixed up in this country. In all seriousness, about making sure that our community feels safe, our community is safe. And that people can feel that they can go to any place of worship, particularly a shul, school, community center, and do it in a way where they don't even think twice about whether it's safe to be there. So.
Amen. Yeah, so everyone just pick up a tomato if you see a terrorist. God forbid. So let's move on. Let's talk about another really important issue for the Jewish community, especially the Orthodox segment of the community, which there's no question that the secularization of civilization is a phenomenon that we've seen over the last many years, where society has moved further and further away from religion and religious values. We're seeing this in the phenomenon, especially in Canada, which seems to be, sadly, one of the leaders in medical assistance in dying. Fortunately, the latest stage of that legislation, which was supposed to come to fruition next month, was tabled for a while to allow people who are mentally ill to opt for medically assisted dying or euthanasia, to have a physician actually help them take their lives. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I was just wondering, what is your party's position on all of this? And as you know, this is a very important issue for our community. I experienced for the first time in my career, in my 30-year career as a rabbi, I got a call a few weeks ago by a member of my shul who told me that my father is very sick and the funeral is going to be on Friday. And I said to him, what are you talking about? He said, well, the family has decided that they're going to terminate their father's life. And I didn't know what to say. I was completely shocked. And I asked him, are you asking me a question? He said, no, Rabbi, it's already been decided. I just wanted to make sure that you could clear your calendar for Friday. Which to me is tragic. It's such a sad commentary on where we are as a society, because when we devalue life, then everyone's life becomes less valued, whether a person is 90 years old, or 50 years old, or 20 years old. And I'm just wondering if you could just reflect on where we are and where we're headed, and if there's anything that we can do.
So, look, I think this is a difficult conversation for the country, but I wouldn't call it medical assistance in dying. I wouldn't call it euthanasia. I would call it Canada's commitment to a nihilistic state. That is what is happening. And it is happening for all of the wrong reasons. And it is happening to in the worst case scenario, to free up capacity in the healthcare system. In the best case scenario, because those in Quebec are pushing for an expansion of this regime. I know what I would do personally. I know what our family would do. Personally, we have the same values as most who would attend this shul. In fact, we have had that presented to us as an option, not with my father who just passed, but with my mother who passed 3 years ago. And it was a very easy decision for our family. I can understand how it won't be an easy decision for other families, particularly when there is pain and suffering. It is not the decision I would make, but it is a decision and a law that exists in our country for those that want to take advantage. I think it is a bigger problem when you have doctors and health professionals on one side who are pushing it. I think it is a problem when you have Orthodox doctors who are not allowed to work in a system where they can refer or refuse to refer. And I think the expansion of this, particularly around mental health, around those, frankly, in the disabilities community, is abhorrent. And I think that the only appropriate pause is a permanent pause on any of that. This should never be a country where you can decide to end your own life because of mental health. This can never be a country where you can decide to end your own life because you are disabled, because you do not have the capacity to make that decision. And I think it's a very, very dangerous game. 80% of Ontario psychiatrists agree. I think that was a big part of the pause. But just know that there are members of parliament, members in the government that want to continue to expand this regime to a point where, you're right, Canada devalues life and dehumanizes life to a very, very dark ending. We need to fix our healthcare system and not rid people of using it. And that's going to be more important in the years to come, where I think lots of families will be presented with this option. And I will add, in lots of cases, if you do not know how to navigate the healthcare system, if English isn't your first language, if you don't have the capacity to make those decisions, then you are in big, big trouble with the system that I think is pushing this over-the-counter, death overnight regime in this country.
I'm sure this must be very acute for you because of your father's recent passing. And again, our condolences. Is this a provincial issue or is it a federal issue?
Well, the Bayt expansion regime is a federal issue. They've paused the portion of the expansion of the regime for 3 years, so just after the next election. That's why the pause was 3 years. And I think we have a decision to make in the next election of what kind of Canada that you want to see and what kind of Canada values life over, I think, a nihilistic society that we are building.
All right, no one has a crystal ball, but this is going to be my last question before we start taking questions from the floor. Avital, I hope you've been collecting some more questions. Okay. Shmuel, is Avital outside?
Sorry?
Is Avital outside?
Yeah.
Just ask her to bring some more questions in. No one has a crystal ball, Melissa, but I wanted to ask if you could look towards 5 to 10 years from now. Your Prime Minister of Canada, of course, we know that. Bezrat Hashem. What does the Jewish community look like in the future in Canada?
So 5 years from now, Pierre Poilievre will be Prime Minister. And look, I think that, I don't think that anything in Canada for the Jewish community and for communities writ large is unfixable. I actually think every single issue that we face today is 100% fixable. Including, are we going to get rid of anti-Semitism? Of course not. It's a pervasive hatred that has existed for since time immemorial. Are we going to have safer streets, more affordable housing, more freedom with what you do and how you spend your time? Absolutely. I think that happens after the next election. I want you to remember that life wasn't like this before Justin Trudeau, and life isn't going to be like this after he's gone.
Okay.
Tell Pierre I said that. I was ready to answer.
Yesterday, I'm just reading some of the questions. Yesterday was the second anniversary of the war in Ukraine. What will be the next government's level of support for the Ukrainian government and its people?
Well, look, it's a valid question. I don't know where the war will be in a year and a half from now, or wherever the next election is. I will tell you that a Canadian government will support the fight against the Russians, and you cannot possibly support Ukraine and support Hamas at the same time. This is all connected. It is all the same culprit. And I think we will get more serious about what kind of support we have for Ukraine, and in terms of making sure that we are going after the Iranian regime, which is funding the Russian ballistic missiles that are killing Ukrainians. But I don't know how to answer that question, given that we don't know where this will be in a year and a half. I hope that in a year and a half, the Ukrainians can push the Russians out, and that we can be focused on the Middle East and focused on a China who is watching this as they look to Taiwan, a North Korea who is more unstable, a Yemen who is having a civil war, our South American countries that are being ravaged by Iranian dictators and Iranian money to go after their neighbors and destabilize their own population. The world is getting to be a much, much more dangerous place, so I think Canada needs a seat at that table, a military that matters, and a voice that it once had on the world stage, like we did with Stephen Harper, like we will with Pierre Poilievre.
This next question, noting that when we look at the support for Israel and the support for, let's say, conservative political views and values, the older people get, the more that they tend to be on the side of what we consider to be right. And the younger voters, especially the ones in universities, seem to be the most vocally opposed to Israel, the most vocally in support of a liberal government, etc. What can the Conservative Party do to attract young voters?
So an interesting question, like a few different things that pop into my head. We've been leading actually with millennials for the last 9 months in every single poll. Our voter coalition looks a lot different, frankly, than it did, or this room. Our voter coalition is young millennials who cannot fathom getting into a home, who have done everything right, including go to school, they got a job, and they can't make it to the end of the month to buy groceries, gas, and pay their exorbitant rent. So that's actually a group that we're doing well with. We are also doing well with a crowd that we haven't done well with, like let's call it the lunchbox crowd, the worker that goes to work in a factory all along southwestern Ontario, northern Ontario, on the island in BC. Those who look at the woke parties in Parliament right now, who don't see themselves in it,
because they're trying to get by and heat their home. So that's who we're actually doing well with. Who we're not doing particularly well with is the overeducated university, university grad, a bit older than I am, and in the seniors category. So we have to figure out how to close the gap with those things. And then the first point that you brought up, I just want to say this, is that you're right. There is an over 40, under 40 view on Israel. So it's not conservative politics, but it's support for Israel. And you can see that in the States in every survey. Those over 40 had like thumbs up for Israel. Those under 40, it's thumbs down, and it is not just our university campuses, because this has been happening for over 20 years on our university campuses. It is TikTok, and it is Instagram, and it is every viral social media that people are glued to, funded and proliferated by a government that wants to see us destabilized by fights in the West and fights all over the world. This is the regime in Beijing having an effect on the young minds of our kids. They are having an effect through TikTok. They are having an effect through fentanyl in our streets. Make no mistake about this. None of this is a coincidence. And it's time that government started smartening up as to how to make this right.